The night my boss said those words, I felt something shift inside me that I couldn't explain at the time. It started as a simple business trip, a routine assignment I had taken dozens of times before. But sometimes the smallest decisions, the ones that seem practical and harmless, quietly open the door to moments that change your life forever. Before we begin, if you believe that kindness, second chances, and unexpected human connections can change a life, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, leave a comment about where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss stories that remind us what truly matters. It was late autumn in Chicago, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones no matter how tightly you wrap your coat. I remember staring through the airport window as snowflakes drifted lazily under the orange glow of the streetlights. My name is Michael Carter, and at that time I was 34 years old, recently divorced, and trying to rebuild a life that had quietly fallen apart without much warning. My boss, Richard Harrison, was the kind of man people respected before they even knew him. He carried confidence the way others carried briefcases, naturally, effortlessly. Richard owned the marketing firm where I worked, a fast-growing company based in Dallas that specialized in turning struggling brands into success stories. I had joined the firm 2 years earlier, desperate for stability after my marriage collapsed and my savings slowly evaporated. Richard wasn't just a boss. He was sharp, observant, and often surprisingly compassionate. But he also had a reputation for being extremely practical when it came to business decisions. That week, we were traveling to Denver for a major client presentation that could potentially double the size of our firm. The stakes were high, the schedule was tight, and every dollar spent had to make sense. When we arrived at the hotel late that evening, the lobby was filled with the quiet hum of travelers dragging suitcases across polished marble floors. Warm golden lights reflected off the tall glass windows, while the smell of fresh coffee drifted from a small cafe in the corner. I stood beside Richard at the front desk, while the receptionist searched for our reservation. Then Richard leaned slightly closer to the counter, glanced at the screen, and said something that caught me completely off guard. "Why waste money on 2 rooms?" he said casually. "We're only here for 1 night." For a moment I thought he was joking, but then he looked at me and added, "You're right." I blinked in confusion. "What?" "You said last week the company should cut unnecessary expenses," he said with a half smile. "Consider this my agreement." I hesitated for a few seconds. Technically, he wasn't wrong. The room had 2 beds, and we had an early morning meeting anyway. It seemed like a harmless way to save a few $100s for the company. So I nodded. "You're right," I said. "I agree." At the time, it felt like nothing more than a small practical choice. But that night would slowly unfold into something far more meaningful than either of us expected. The room was quiet and spacious, overlooking the snowy skyline of Denver. The city lights flickered across the window like distant stars, while the hum of traffic echoed faintly below. We both worked for a while, reviewing slides and adjusting presentation notes. Around midnight, Richard closed his laptop and sat back in the chair near the window. The confident businessman I had always seen suddenly looked tired. Not physically tired, something deeper. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The silence in the room felt oddly comfortable, like 2 strangers sharing a long train ride through the night. Then Richard did something I had never seen him do before. He began talking about his life, not the polished success story people admired at conferences, the real story. He spoke about growing up in a small town in Missouri, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. He talked about sleeping on a couch until he was 14 because their apartment only had 1 bedroom. He described the nights when his mother would pretend she wasn't hungry so he could eat the last portion of dinner. I sat quietly, realizing the man I had admired for his business brilliance carried a past filled with struggle and sacrifice. Then his voice softened. "My mother used to say something," he said while staring out at the snow. "She said the worst kind of poverty isn't having no money. It's feeling like nobody sees you." That sentence lingered in the air. For some reason, it hit me harder than anything else that night. Maybe because I understood exactly what he meant. After my divorce, I had spent months feeling invisible to the world. Friends slowly stopped calling. Family conversations became awkward. It was as if failure had placed a quiet wall between me and everyone else. Richard turned toward me. "Why did your marriage end?" he asked gently. It wasn't the kind of question a boss normally asks an employee, but something about the honesty of the moment made it impossible to dodge. So I told him the truth. How the long work hours had slowly created distance. How the arguments became more frequent. How one day my wife simply said she felt like she was living with a stranger. And how the silence after she left felt louder than any argument we had ever had. Richard listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "You know something, Michael," he said quietly. "Life doesn't punish people for failing. It punishes them for refusing to stand back up." That sentence stayed with me long after the lights in the room went out. The next morning, the sky over Denver was bright blue and filled with sunlight reflecting off fresh snow. We walked into the client's office confident, focused, and strangely energized. The presentation went better than either of us expected. Every slide landed perfectly. Every strategy made sense. By the end of the meeting, the client signed a contract worth nearly $5 million. It was the biggest deal our company had ever closed. But the moment that changed my life happened later that afternoon at the airport. We sat quietly at the terminal waiting for our flight. Richard suddenly reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. He slid it across the table toward me. Inside was a promotion letter, Vice President of Strategic Development. My heart nearly stopped. "I don't understand," I said. Richard smiled slightly. "I've been watching you for 2 years," he said. "You work harder than anyone here. But more importantly, you care about people. That matters more than talent." I stared at the paper in disbelief. Then he added something that nearly brought tears to my eyes. "And besides," he said with a small laugh, "if you're willing to share a hotel room with your boss to save the company money, you're probably the kind of person I want helping run it." That small decision, agreeing to 1 room instead of 2, had opened the door to a conversation, a connection, and a moment of recognition I never saw coming. Sometimes life doesn't change through big dramatic events. Sometimes it changes through quiet moments of honesty between 2 people who suddenly see each other clearly. Before we reach the ending, I have a special request for you. Comment below with the word second chance if you believe people deserve the opportunity to rebuild their lives after failure, because that belief might change someone's future more than you realize. 3 years later, our company had expanded into 6 states. I was leading a team of 50 employees, mentoring young professionals who reminded me of the person I used to be. Richard eventually retired and moved back to Missouri to care for his aging mother. But every year, on the anniversary of that Denver trip, he sends me a short message. "Best investment I ever made," it always says. And every time I read it, I remember that snowy night when a simple sentence changed everything. Why waste money on 2 rooms? Sometimes the most unexpected decisions create the most meaningful connections, and sometimes the person sitting quietly beside you may be the one who helps you rediscover your worth. If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who might need encouragement today, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us how powerful kindness, trust, and second chances can truly be. Because you never know, the next small decision you make might quietly change the rest of your life.